I'm going to give a little bit more of a historical or sort of more tribute-like talk. I'm not going to push too many ideas. Once or twice I might get a bit carried away. But so my name's Anna Jordanous. I work in the field of computational creativity. For people in Coimbra at ICCC at the moment, I'm very sad not to be with you, but next year, hopefully. So I wanted to give a historical look back at Maggie's influence on the field of computational creativity and creative AI. So to give some context of, so to give you a little bit of my background as to why I'm giving this talk, I'm going to take you back to around about 2026 or so, and I'm thinking, I'm really enjoying my master's at Edinburgh. I want to do a PhD. I don't know what in, but I kind of think AI. And then I wandered into Till's bookshop in Edinburgh, and I found a copy of Maggie's book, The Creative Mind. And I thought, well, that looks interesting. And my goodness, it was. And so that planted my direction. I thought, I'm interested in creative AI. I'm interested in computational creativity, but not for the sake of what cool things can I make a computer do. I'm interested in what we can learn from these models. I'm interested in how we can analyze what's going on. So I ended up applying for my PhD in various places. I ended up at Sussex, and I have memories of sitting. I feel like the lecture theatre has moved on. Memories of sitting somewhere over there in probably what's floating space now. And I was sitting in my first few COGS seminars, and there was this very gentle looking lady sitting at the front. And I thought, I think I know who that is, but I was a bit starstruck. Didn't really. And then we'd have the COGS seminars, and I remember on more than one occasion, just watching her watching this lady ask some very simple sounding questions, very straightforward clarifications, and then bam, here comes the killer point where she'd destroyed the speaker's argument in some incredibly intelligent way that seemed obvious now. And that was Maggie, of course. And so that was my first memories of interacting directly with Maggie. She's certainly a big influence in me coming to Sussex for my PhD, alongside lots of the people sitting here now that were part of that wonderful melting pot that was COGS, and that is COGS, and that hopefully continues to survive all the restructures and blah, blah, blah. And I just have one more personal recollection to put in here. In the bottom corner there, as I finished my PhD and I moved to King's to become a postdoc, and I was put in charge of organising the seminar series. And for those seminars, we ran them as you had to submit your abstract to see if you were worthy of coming to give your seminar for us. And we got an abstract from Maggie. That was exciting. We also got an abstract from Blay. Very happy to host Blay. I don't know if you see yourself there. Third down. And so I was able to host Maggie as this very nervous postdoc who still hadn't interacted with her very much while I was at Sussex. And she arrived, she gave a wonderful talk, and we went out for dinner afterwards. And all the way through, she treated me as if I was another incredible professor coming along to share my knowledge. You know, I wasn't. I was this scared little postdoc, but she treated me with that level of respect and similar to what people were saying earlier on, just recognizing people for what they could speak about. And I'll never forget how she was with people. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what Maggie's impact was on computational creativity research. So to just give a little bit of intro into the field in general. So what is computational creativity? The first major attempt at coming to some sort of definition was by Simon Colton and Geraint Wiggins in their paper about whether computational creativity is the final frontier. That computational systems which, by taking on particular responsibilities, exhibit behaviours that unbiased observers would deem to be creative. That opened up a huge discussion about what are these responsibilities, is this right? And so as of the current day, the definition revolves around modelling, simulating, or replicating creativity using a computer. And it's an area where there's computer science, philosophy, artistic endeavours, scientific endeavours, design, and on and on and on. So to give some idea of the areas, the field of research, there's a strong amount of people in this area of research who want to do cool things, creative things with computers. And there's a lot of people who want to use computers to understand how our creativity works, to understand the models. And just as a little bit of a timeline of how this field has developed. So it started off around about the first sort of events dedicated to this area around about late 1990s, the AISB symposia of the time, various different workshops, different AI events, which then evolved into its own full conference, the ICCC conference, as well as various other workshops and other relevant series springing up. So from a small area of people just meeting up together at symposia like AISB to becoming an event which now has workshops at various AI conferences such as IGCAI, NeurIPS, and it has its own association of computational creativity now, which was established in 2017, and various journals. And I'll come back to that point right on the end there, the OECD point, a little bit later. All right. I was trying to capture visually sort of where computational creativity started and where it's currently come up to now. As you might recognise on the left-hand side, some shots that are pictures produced by the Aaron system by Harold Cohen, coloured by the Aaron system. Moving up to this shot from DALL-E by OpenAI, an illustration of an avocado sitting in a therapist's chair saying, "I just feel so empty inside because its pit has been pulled out." So that's maybe some illustration of where this area has moved as AI has changed. And it's now very much LLM dominated. There are people who are working around that LLM dominance. Okay, back to Maggie. So although we spent a bit of time this morning thinking about the Minds and Machines book, the Creative Mind book is the one that's been significantly influential in the area of computational creativity. But Maggie has published in creativity and AI over several decades. I think the earliest mention of creative and AI I could find was from a 1973 paper, but I'm willing to accept advances on 1973 for those of you who might have them. And because I'm really geeky, I like to look at numbers, I like to look at frequencies, I like to look at data, I like to look at text. And so I did an analysis. I took proceedings of the annual International Conference for Computational Creativity. I was thinking, how often does Maggie get mentioned in this conference? Is her influence still strong? I want to see this in data for myself. And the headline result that I got, on average, the word Boden is mentioned in, on average, 29% of papers at that conference every year, on average. And in total, her name appears 857 times over 14 years. So more than one mention per paper. So I'll just show this in terms of year by year. So we are, so I haven't got access to the 2026 publications yet. Maybe I'll update. But the number of times Maggie's name is mentioned in these papers is hovering around about the kind of high 50s at the moment, I guess, either side of that. And if you look on the right-hand side, the percentage of papers mentioning her each year, it's not shrinking. It's pretty constant. This is not somebody who's being forgotten. This is somebody that continues to influence what we're doing. Okay, so what is her main areas of, what are her main areas of influence? So I've chosen my three. I'm happy to be challenged if there's others as well. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the Lovelace questions that she proposed in the Creative Mind, a little bit on her threefold of framework of creativity that Mike's just mentioned a little bit, and then a little bit on P creativity versus H creativity. All right, so firstly, the Lovelace questions, named after Ada Lovelace. Ada Lovelace as the world's first computer programmer before a computer existed. And Maggie quotes Ada Lovelace's notes here, referring to the analytical engine. The analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do, Maggie's only, whatever we know how to order it to perform. So from that, Maggie came up with 4 Lovelace questions. Can computational models help us to understand creativity? Can a computer appear to be creative? Can a computer appear to recognize creativity? And can a computer really be creative? And suddenly, with these 4 questions, people who were terrified of question number 4 suddenly had other questions that we could address. And I'm saying we. So, for example, my PhD was around the can a computer appear to be creative? I'm pretty interested in 1, 2, and 3 there. I'm never going to try and attempt for, I shouldn't say that in front of people who might remind me of it. But suddenly we've got a way of attacking our research in a way which makes sense in a more objective way. Okay, so move on there. Secondly, Maggie's ideas about novelty within creativity. So we've heard about there's this distinction between P creativity, psychological creativity, sometimes called personal creativity, which is something that is new to the creator, not necessarily new to the world, but new to the creator, versus H creativity, which is an extension of that, where the creative work is new historically, never been seen before. And if I quote Maggie here, the point at issue is not who thought of X first, but is X a creative idea? And if so, how creative is it? So this is justifying the focus on P creativity first. So we don't have to be creating new Einstein bots. The creativity of the individual is a valid thing to target. And this particular distinction comes in very handy. It gives us a language to talk about. So I'm involved in this thing for the OECD, where they're coming up with AI capability indicators in various different areas. One of the areas is creativity. Other areas like problem solving, language, I think. And I was having a conversation where the people I was talking to, they were trying to justify the existence of this. What is the basic level that a machine can demonstrate creativity at? And they were saying this, the basic level might be something around a competent imitator. It's sort of thinking about cover bands, wonderful way of making music. And so my argument was, yes, but why is that different from a photocopier? And we were going around in circles until we started talking about P creativity versus H creativity. And suddenly we had the vocabulary to discuss this in a way where we actually got somewhere. So there is, so some of these slides come from teaching materials actually that I developed with Colin Johnson, who's in Nottingham. We now teach around about 100 students a year in computational creativity, which is kind of cool. So if we think about creativity as creating something new, but if we look broadly enough, maybe that thing already exists. So can creativity be anything more than exploration? So this brings us on to the threefold framework of creativity, which I won't recap too much, but we've looked with Mike's talk and other people have also mentioned 3 different ways of approaching creativity: the exploration, combinational and transformational. So this idea that exploratory creativity explores some sort of defined space to see where are the interesting parts, which parts haven't been looked at yet. Transformational creativity is this idea of changing that conceptual space. I'll say conceptual space. I need to digest a little bit more what Mike was saying earlier, to include new options that weren't thought of before. And combinational creativity is where you might take 2 spaces, join them together, and suddenly you've got a new area to explore. So I want to put some flesh onto this in terms of what this has influenced. I'm going to skip that. Okay, so where computational creativity started and stayed for quite a long time was the idea of creativity as a search for the best option, newest option, whatever option. So can creativity be as a search space? What's the answer to this problem? So what kind of spaces would be searching? I can skip over this slide as well now. Thank you, Mike. This idea of the conceptual space, some sort of definition of an area that fits into valid solutions to the thing we're searching for. So this got taken up and this provided a lot of areas for computational creativity researchers to develop. People like Geraint Wiggins, a paper called Searching for Computational Creativity. People like Mark Riedel using it for searching for the story to be constructed, and Dan Ventura a little bit later on as well. So this worked really well for a while, but it hit its limitations because you have to find the problem. If you're searching for the solution to a question, what is the question? What is the problem you're trying to solve? Although there's some quite nice ideas about problem finding creativity. So just to slightly go off my historical thoughts and just sneak into the future a little bit here. Is this what LLMs are doing? Where they're generating things, generative AI is generating new products. Are they just searching the space that's opened up by their training? Is this what we're doing with our prompt engineering? When we write better prompts, we get better search through the space. So maybe that's an argument for exploratory creativity being justified in the context of generative AI tools. I'm saying that with a bit of a frown on my face because I don't know how I feel about that. I do want to just quickly highlight some work by Max Papercorn he was looking at using LLMs by tweaking a parameter on the LLM called temperature. The idea of the temperature parameter is that it increases the entropy of the products of what choices the LLM makes when decoding its what answer it's going to give. And the little dots on the diagrams there are different stories, and each t equals 0.001, t equals 0.334, and so on. This represents different stories generated at different temperatures. And this is quite a small study and needs a little bit of widening out to different domains. But what Max was finding was that LLMs aren't necessarily exploring the space, they're just covering the acknowledged areas of space that fit that particular task better. So for example, it's starting to, as the temperature increases, mass is starting to uncover new areas of space, the temperature increases, and starting to cover that space better. Never quite reaching that space, for example, or there. So maybe it's not as simple as just saying generative AI is exploratory creativity. Okay, and transformational creativity. So once Maggie had written about transformational creativity, various people tried to implement this computationally. Graham Ritchie is probably the most notable person in terms of developing this further. I should have probably cited Chris Thornton as well, but I forgot. Sorry, Chris. There's also, so I was looking for papers around about with the term transformation and creativity. There's a paper this year at ICCC that I can't see yet because it's not available, but it's transformational you need to play on the attention paper. One of the issues that you have, though, as you look for papers that talk about transformation, is that lots of these papers are talking about transformers, as in the fundamental component of current AI tools. So transformational creativity is starting to become overlooked a little bit. Because exploratory creativity is becoming so much easier with current generative AI tools. So I'll just put that out there as a comment. But one thing that transformational creativity allowed a richer debate on was in the area of evaluation. So to what extent is the creative machine able to produce work or find solutions which somehow represent transformational creativity? This is something that Maggie talked about in a keynote in 1999 for AISB. I think it might have been here, but I'm going to bow to other people to correct me, where she used her keynote to call people out and say, it's not enough to be just producing these papers about these lovely creative systems. So I quote her here, to enable AI models to evaluate their own ideas, especially those produced as a result of transformational creativity, which by definition breaks some of the accepted rules, is a tall order. Not because computers can't really value anything, that may be so, but it is a philosophical rather than a scientific point, but because we find it even more difficult to articulate our aesthetic values clearly than to define the rich conceptual spaces concerned. So how do we define how we judge something? That's even harder than defining the thing in the first place. So that was her message. And she called on authors of papers at AISB 99 to look at the extent to which they were aware of this sort of problem. Okay. All right, and finally, combinational creativity. I've called this combinatorial creativity for many years, and I think that's wrong. Combinatorial, one of those two. So combinational creativity is the idea of taking maybe two different types of conceptual space, bringing them together. And it's reminiscent of what Arthur Koestler referred to as bisociation. So taking the sudden interlocking of two previously unrelated skills or matrices of thought. And an example that Colin found when we were thinking about this, which is amazing, is chess boxing. So I'll just let you think about what chess boxing might be as you. I haven't been able to find anything more recent to demonstrate that chess boxing still exists, but I really, really want it to. I really want it to. But what I do know exists are these funny 5-finger shoes, the Vibram shoes. So I use that as my safer example because the combinational creativity approach led to a really dominant way of thinking in creativity, computational creativity for some time, of conceptual blending. So this idea of conceptual blending is to take two different input spaces and blend them together. So it comes originally from Falconio and Turner linguistics ideas. And this saw a surge in research in conceptual blending for computational creativity. Lots of, I say lots, about two or three European projects in the FP7 call were specifically around the idea of conceptual blending for creativity. So who am I to say it's a bad thing? It's great, bring us money, yes please. So just to highlight a bit of work in this, I've highlighted in particular visual blending. Visual blending is taking conceptual blending in the visual domain, creating new visuals. So I wanted to highlight some work by Xiao Cunha et al. And also to highlight a fantastic ex-student of mine, Marzia Bilwani, who took this idea of visual blending, very influenced by Xiao Cunha's work, taking visual blending ideas and fuzzy logic to generate new emojis. And she did this work a couple of years ago. The emojis she generated may not have been quite as exciting in the end as some of Xiao's output, but there were some beautiful things that she generated. Okay. Try not to go too over time, so let me move on. Zhao, sorry if you're watching, but I'm not going to your work more. Okay. So what I wanted to finish off with is just by saying, so here's some areas where Maggie has directly influenced how computational creativity research has developed. And it's not just in terms of the practical, but in terms of formal theories as well. So one that I haven't mentioned yet is a framework derived by Geraint Wiggins, where he took Maggie Boden's proposals and came up with a framework which defined formal rule sets and evaluation, various functions to capture systems, to describe systems in formal ways. And Geraint intended this to be used to analyse, evaluate and compare creative systems. So giving us some sort of formal structure to do computational creativity work in a way which could be more objective, could be more, I want to say, scientifically organised. It allowed Simon Colton in around about, I've forgotten the year, anyway, to come to get some fairly significant EPSRC funding to basically formalise computational creativity theory. So it gave that extra credibility that helps the field to grow, to attract money. Okay. All right. So just to summarise, I wanted to really highlight in this area of computational creativity, creative AI, the very, very wide-ranging influence that Maggie's had in developing that area, so that we have an international conference in it happening right now, lots of people interested in it, and starting to become this area that is causing contention all over again with the generative AI current scene. And Maggie continues to influence that area. This isn't a historical remembering of what she said. This is what she said is continuing to have value and to guide what we're doing, to give structure and to give a purpose. And what I'll finish with is that there are so many areas of this book which still remain untouched. There's one very particular area which I'll mention quickly. I saw Zoltan Dienes earlier, I think he's gone now, but there's areas where Maggie has described Christopher Longwet-Higgins' work in improvisational music understanding. And there's some work by Christopher Longwet-Higgins which sits on a Sussex disc archive somewhere. And I've got a long-standing want to try and resuscitate that work and see how it compares to current AI improvisation systems. So maybe I'll go looking for Zoltan later as well, and we'll start that conversation up. But so for a book that was written published when I was 10, the influence that it continues to have on creating an entire research field or helping to create an entire research field is really, really vast. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we've got perhaps some questions if you're willing to take. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm just intrigued by the temperature parameter.
Oh, yeah.
Tweaking it to change choices. So how do we know how far to adjust temperature so that we don't have predictably boring on one side and unpredictably baffling on the other extreme of this spectrum? we achieve that sweet spot, but time still remains the unexplained part of human creativity.
Yeah. So the question is where do we find that sweet spot in the temperature parameter? The very sad news is that Max's paper did not find this, but found, so the physics of the parameter works roughly within a range of 0 to 2 before you get nonsensical results. So 0.001 to 2.0 before the results start to descend into nonsense. What Max found was that as you increase the parameter, you get more surprising results, but the value starts to decrease. So there's no sweet spot for creativity as such. Where that sweet spot is in terms of finding results that are more interesting and valuable comes right back down to that value question. How do you evaluate that value? So we tried that in the original paper, partly by quantitative metrics about coherence, and partly by asking people. The problem with asking people is they can't keep up with the computer, and neither should we expect that to happen. So I think there's real value in working on metrics that can try and proxy our aesthetic judgments. I think that's a really exciting way of working. Sebastian Burns has just done some really, really interesting work in diversity metrics, as in diversity of a population. But I think that question of what makes the best output is still there. It's not solved. LLMs haven't solved it yet. If they do, I might have to retire early because that still drives my career. But yeah, I think that's one thing that Max did do with this work, was to sort of debunk this idea of creativity being the magic, temperature being the magic creativity parameter, which it was getting billed as in a bit of a throwaway. And he said, no, it's not. Here's some evidence. And so we continue to show that creativity isn't as easy as tweaking a knob, but we haven't worked out what else yet. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we can
Okay, thank you. 2 points, a brief minor point. The minor one is a conference series that Maggie was involved in wasn't mentioned in your history. Maybe it should have been creativity and proficiency.
Oh my goodness, you're absolutely right.
In 93.
Thank you.
And is in London in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you so much, Ernest. You're absolutely correct. Thank you.
I think it was one of my standard points. I think it was one of those. Harold Cohen made a point, which I remember discussing with Maggie, which is that it's difficult to really understand creativity only in terms of the disembodied mind. So he said that his program, which produced all those images, such as the ones that I showed, couldn't be creative until it could look at the images that it produced. That's what he did in order to spot that he's creative.
Yeah. There's and I think that goes back a little bit to Mike's point about embedded creativity. I'm working at the moment with somebody in Berlin.